Perhaps you've heard the story of the two young farmers standing out at the crossroads after work one day. And Billy asked, "If you had $1 million, would you give me half of it?" And Roy replied, "You know I would." So Billy asked another question, "If you had $1,000, would you give me 500?" Billy said, "We've been friends for over 20 years. You know I would give you $500 if I had 1,000. Billy scratched his chin. He looked at him and he asked again, "If you had 2 hogs, would you give me 1? And Roy said, "That's not fair. You know I've got 2 hogs." We all need to understand that God never requires us to give what we don't have. God's requirement is for us to give out of what we do have if our hearts are moved to do so. That's what our text in Exodus this morning is all about. It's about the very thing that we're doing here today, offering the gifts to be used for the life and the work of the Church of Jesus Christ and all that it includes, because our hearts are moved to do so. So before I get too far, I want to tell you that we're going to do 2 things this morning that Presbyterians are not particularly good at. We will talk about money, and I will ask you to participate in the sermon at some point. So take that as a bit of a warning as you enter worship this morning. Be cautious. I will ask you to be uncomfortable and participate at some point. So let me frame something of this Exodus text for you this morning. Israel has been liberated from slavery in Egypt and has been wandering in the desert for some time now. And in spite of their complaining about the food and the water and the dangers associated with wilderness travel, the people are coming around to realizing just how far it is that God has brought them. Not just geographically, but them as a people, as a nation. They have had some significant setbacks along the way. Israel's reaction to the uncertainty, to the perceived scarcity, and the general fear of not knowing what was going to come next, whether it was going to be better or worse in the future, has led them to make some, less than stellar choices. If you recall, not long before this passage, at one point in Moses' absence, the people started to worry. They looked around and they couldn't see God and they couldn't see Moses, and Aaron, being left in charge, was all there was for them to look for leadership. And he decided that they should go and melt down all of the gold that they could find and make a god for themselves in the form of a cow. We all remember that didn't go over very well. But through some last-minute diplomatic negotiations, Moses managed to convince God not to turn his wrath on the people. And ultimately, with a little more experience under their belts and a little bit more distance from Egypt, the Israelites got better at seeing, often in hindsight, how faithful God had been in the promise to lead them to a better life in a new land. The challenging reality at this point in the story is that the wilderness wandering experience is not going to be a short one. And maybe we all feel a bit that way as we consider our global economy today. The recession is over, technically, but we certainly have settled into a new normal, one that is not exactly robust for everyone. And perhaps that isn't all bad news. Don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to suggest that if you're unemployed, that's in any way a good thing. But we have all had to consider our resources potentially a little more closely than we had before. And maybe we find some things that we had taken for granted. Taken for granted just how far our resources will go when we have to. And can we see and be grateful for all that we have in the midst of that? The Food Stamp Challenge is an opportunity for us to take stock of just exactly what it is that we have. The Israelites, too, have many things to be grateful for. It wasn't that long ago that they were stealing from the Egyptians just to get by. But now, here in the midst of the wilderness, they actually find that God has provided in abundance not only food and water, but also their forgiveness, the lack of taking God seriously and trusting in God's providence. As a people, they are starting to experience and recognize where God is at work in the situation as they reflect on just how far they have come. Our text this morning is a picture of a people who realize the second chance that they have been given and the reality that God has been with them all along, even before the tent of meeting is complete, this place where God promises to dwell and where they will worship together. Even before that, they get the sense that God is with them. They are starting to see God's work in their lives and that they are responding to that experience.